Safeguarding is no add-on to the life of the church. It is a fundamental expression of the working out of our faith.
The ability to reflect on that and then to think, okay, what can we do moving forward? Exactly what we want to do.
Safeguarding is an enabler. It is not a barrier. Safeguarding, as I've said, is the essence of who we are as disciples of Jesus Christ.
It's a real privilege to be here today. Just in terms of taking care of yourself, please do feel free to leave the room at any point if you need to. That's really important that you can do that. I'm going to attempt to do a number of things in 40 minutes, and this may be a stretch too far, but we'll see. But what I wanted to do today, because of the theme of the conference, is I wanted to try to do a few different things. I'm going to start off with something that's slightly unusual. So when I deliver safeguarding training, which I do, but normally around spiritual abuse, I ask people, when you were little, what did you want to be when you grew up? Okay? And so I'm just going to show you. Now, most of the people that come to training are people who are in clergy roles or safeguarding roles or that kind of thing. So let's have a look. In the Church of England, what did people want to be when they were little? Well, the first and unusual answer that we've got a number of times is a dolphin trainer. There are many among you who aspired to being a dolphin trainer. Some people, 2 people, said they wanted to be David Attenborough. And why wouldn't you? I mean, he is a national legend and 100 years old. Amazing. My favourite ever answer is a Thunderbird puppet, until the person said they realised that actually it was a puppet and they were crushed. Never at any point in asking, what did you want to be, has anybody ever said, I wanted to do something to do with safeguarding. And yet here you all are, in some kind of role connected to that. And I'm very grateful for that, because I get to speak at things like this, but you are the people on the ground that keep people safe, not me. And I'm really, really grateful. So I want us to think about, how do we get to be safer and healthier? So I'm going to do that in a number of different ways. I'm going to talk about what's already being done well. I think that's really important. And I'm going to draw all the way through this presentation on research that we have done. And I want to start off by thanking people that have taken part, especially those who have had experiences of abuse and harm. It's incredibly costly to then take part in research so people can learn about it. And you're going to hear some of their voices today. You're going to see some images that they have chosen. Then I want being healthy is about raising awareness. And so I want to talk about spiritual abuse. What is it? What does it look like? What does it do? And how do we respond well and healthily when somebody discloses that this has happened to them? And then finally, I want to think about culture, all in 40 minutes. It's ambitious, but it's possible, I think. And I think it's really important for us to talk about culture, because if we want to address issues, particularly of spiritual abuse, we have to think about what's happening in our cultures that enables that to develop, to continue, and not to be addressed sometimes. So I wanted to start off with some positives. Is that okay? I don't know why I asked that at a conference, because I've got the slides and I don't know what I'd do if you said no. But I wanted to start with an image that one of the people who took part in my most recent piece of research was on disclosures. So we asked people to choose images that represented their experiences of disclosing abuse that had happened to them in a religious context, or of not being able to disclose, and then images that represented how they were responded to. And this image was chosen by somebody, and they said this: my experience of telling somebody about a very sensitive issue was very liberating, freeing, like the kite flying. And she was talking about when she'd come to disclose in a Christian context what had happened to her, and that response to that disclosure was really positive, and to her it felt like the kite flying. And in her interview that she did with us, she told us about things that made that kite go down and things that made that kite go back up again. But that first response was a really positive one. What else is being done well? Well, In the pandemic, we decided to do some research where we asked people who were in positions of safeguarding leads, so maybe PSOs or different roles within safeguarding, to fill out an online survey. We did it in partnership with 318, and we found some really positive things. We found some really good examples of good practice that people were already doing. We also found that lots of people holding safeguarding roles have got a wealth of experience that they bring to those roles. That might be a background in education or police or social work, but they're bringing that to the table when they come to these roles. And one of my tasks, I think, is trying to encourage those external to church environments, to faith environments, that people holding these roles are a really important part of the story and of the solution to keeping people safe. What else did we find? Now, there's some nice infographics here. Oh, let me go back to those. So we found that, the writing is really tiny here, isn't it? We found that 73% felt that the local church or Christian organisation understood safeguarding. That was a really good message. Some of you might be thinking, well, those weren't from my particular area, but that's okay. 78% felt that their local church or Christian organisation understood their role. That's really important. And 87% said that they actually felt supported. If you're not within that number, today is a really good opportunity to network with each other and get that support that is needed for this role. Other things that were being done well. People told us about all the work they were doing to promote safeguarding being everybody's responsibility. Now, I just want to tell a little anecdote on this. So in our church, we have Safeguarding Sunday, and we have a wonderful safeguarding lead, deputy safeguarding. It's all really great. And the safeguarding lead got up and she talked about safeguarding. And at the end of her talk, she said, and so whose responsibility is safeguarding? And somebody very loudly in the congregation said, yours. And she was like, no, it's everybody's. But there's lots of work going on to encourage people about their role. So lots of positive examples of collaboration, networking, both within churches, but also external. I'm going to come back to that because it was also a challenge. Lots of evidence of promoting, and the Bishop said earlier about the way in which safeguarding is talked about, and I want to come back to that because in some of the reviews that I've done, often safeguarding is talked about really negatively, and that actually is really unhelpful in many ways. But we saw lots of examples of people encouraging their churches to think about safeguarding positively. As I've said, people knew what the role of the safeguarding lead was. Many people were doing lots of work, thank you, around training people, getting people up to date. You know, when you send out those invites, I often do a little thing like that about what did you want to be when you grew up. But one of the other things I used to do is ask people, when somebody says safeguarding, I think. And I used to answer the question. And sometimes we used images. I like images. And we had a lot of health and safety jackets. And we also had a lot of people saying, is it really 3 years since I did this? It's not always helpful, is it? But it's so important. And I see it and you see it from the other point, because you see it when safeguarding goes right and it's so protective. And we see it where it doesn't and it's so harmful. And so it's really, really important. Lots of people reviewing and editing policies and getting those DBS checks done. Really important stuff. So there's lots of good stuff going on. So that's where I wanted to start. In fact, it was great on that first Menti page to see people saying, we'd like a bit of encouragement. Well, there's a starter for 10. There's lots of really good stuff going on. And we want to do more of that. We want to recognise it. We want to grab a hold of it. So one of the things that's great to do is to share good practice. If you're doing something that's working really well, sometimes we can be a little bit British and we don't really want to talk about that. Let's talk about the things that we need to change. That's good. But if you're doing something well, take an opportunity today to share it with somebody, because then they can do that same thing. We don't all have to reinvent the wheel. So I want to move on and talk about spiritual abuse. This is my life's work. I started this in 2001, so that's quite a long time ago now. And really, over the course of that 25 years, we have learned more and more and more. It's interesting, and I'm so thankful when the bishop said, this is a real thing. Probably for the first 5 or 10 or maybe more of those years, I think I spent a long time trying to persuade people that this was real and there was something that was happening to people that really needed to be talked about. I think we've moved on a bit, but there's a long way to go. So as a starting point, often people will say to me, well, not only what is spiritual abuse, but when does spiritual abuse become it? When does guidance become control? Really, really important, good questions. In the Church of England guidance, you'll see this little diagram. Now, I developed this out of this 25 years of research, and somebody said to me on one occasion, oh, Lisa, we use your fruit polo diagram a lot. And that is how it's referred to, and that's okay, because it helps us remember. But if we start at this end, we can see the green fruit polo, which is actually the least popular, is really good news. That is healthy behaviour. And in our context, we see lots of that. We see lots of people encouraging each other. My husband works for the church. He spends lots of his week going and visiting people who would otherwise be really isolated. There's some really good things happening in the way in which we now do our work with children, young people, and adults at risk of harm. There's lots of healthy behaviour that we can see. Lots of supporting, lots of looking after each other. If you go a little bit further down, you come to the first yellow fruit polo, we start to see unhelpful behaviour, and we're all guilty of that from time to time. We don't communicate very well, and we upset somebody in the process. Or we're so passionate about something that whenever anybody asks a question, we see it as a criticism, and we're quite defensive in how we respond to it. We all do it. It's not helpful. Usually we can be recognise it ourselves, and we might say, do you know, I'm a bit sorry about that. Should have done that differently. Or somebody might point it out to us, and we might be able to address it and move ourselves back down. If we go up the spectrum, we get to patterns of behaviour. And in terms of spiritual abuse, we get to patterns of controlling and coercive behaviour, where people might check themselves before they talk to somebody because they're so worried about what the response is going to be. Where we might see a pattern of somebody where somebody raises a question or raises an issue or asks a question, the person responding to that is very heavy in their response, very critical, very much shutting down what's being said. And we start to feel uncomfortable, we start to see these patterns of control, pressure being put on people to do things. I'm going to say a little bit more about that. When we move up to the red fruit polo, we see a systematic pattern of highly controlling, coercive behaviour with a religious rationale or within a religious context. And that's where it might cross that threshold into spiritual abuse. And actually, you can use this spectrum of behaviour to map all kinds of different forms of harm and abuse. And in the Church of England guidance, there's examples of what might fit where and where you might signpost in those different fruit polos. But it's really important to recognise that for a number of people, many people actually, have experienced this kind of coercive control within a Christian faith context and others. I want to be really clear about that. Most of my work until recently has been within the Christian faith context. That's the context I'm part of and I know best. But I am now working with people from across religious groups, and we're seeing the patterns of behaviour are the same across. So when we're defining it, we are talking about a form of emotional abuse of children or psychological abuse of adults, and that systematic pattern of coercive and controlling behaviour. I should say I have sent a set of slides to Becca for you to have after. It won't have absolutely every slide in it because some of the pictures I'm going to show you we haven't yet published, but you will. But these slides, the majority of them you will have. So if your hand is already aching, then don't worry too much, you will get them. And we might see that behaviour in a religious or spiritual institution like a church, but it might be in a place of education, which is faith-based, or it might be within a home where there's a religious or spiritual belief. So lots of contexts in which we might see this. And some of those are more complex to address than others. And I'm going to talk about the impact that spiritual abuse has. One of the important things is, when we did a piece of research in 2018 with 31/8, and I think it was 1,531 people completed a survey, 1,002 of whom said, I've experienced spiritual abuse. And within that were a large number of leaders. And so I think if we're going to talk about harm, we want to talk about it in all the forms that it happens and in all the relationships that it happens. So of course, if you are in a position of power, it may be that there are ways in which you can control and coerce people because of the position that you are in. But actually, we also found that leaders can and were being controlled and coerced by members of their congregation or their leadership teams. And for some people, that was the reason they left ministry. Because things like servant leadership were being used to say, you've got to be available every minute of the day, you're not working hard enough, you're not doing enough. We had one minister who had to get permission to spend anything more than £1. He couldn't do that. So if he was going to visit somebody, he wasn't able to do that without the permission of the leadership team. So that's something that I think is really important, that spiritual abuse can be perpetrated by those in positions of leadership. It can be perpetrated by members of the congregation. It can be perpetrated by people on the same level, as can any form of harm and abuse. But it is really important. What we don't want to do is try to address the issue, but only address part of it. We want to address all of it. One of the other things that is important to understand is that spiritual abuse can happen on its own, without any other form of harm and abuse. And it's often really difficult to evidence, because psychological abuse is often difficult to evidence, isn't it? You're often looking at a pattern of behaviour that is happening over a period of time. When you only see one example, it might not look that much, but when you start to put it together, you see what is happening. So it can be very difficult to evidence, but it is important to recognise that it can happen on its own. But it can and often does happen as an integral form of other forms of harm and abuse. So we did some work with Restored Domestic Violence Charity, you might know of them, and Broken Rights, and we were looking at experiences of domestic abuse in the Christian faith community. We've created a freely available PDF from that, so if you're interested in the findings, I can send the link to Becca afterwards. But in that research, one of the things we found was that 60% of the people who had experienced domestic abuse that were responding to the survey said they had experienced spiritual abuse as part of that. So either the use of scripture or the use of belief to actually as part of the control. And this is a really important point. It's something that we can't say too much about because we don't have loads of numbers on it at the moment. But some people's spiritual abuse was being perpetrated by people who did not have a faith themselves. So they actually were using faith as a means of controlling somebody else, but they didn't have that personal faith themselves. We need to do a lot more work around that to unpack that a bit more. So when you are hearing cases of abuse, then one of the things I want to ask you today is to have your antennae aware of, could spiritual abuse be part of this person's experience? Because in the work I've done, it often is, but it's often an unspoken part, because either people haven't heard about it themselves, so it's difficult to recognise, or they're not sure whether the person they're speaking to will have done, so they may not talk about it. So what kind of things do we see? Well, we see coercion and control. That runs across the whole experience of spiritual abuse, people's behaviour being coerced and controlled. And there's a number of different ways that happens. It might happen through manipulating and exploiting somebody's behaviour. So expecting lots and lots and lots of service from somebody, more than can be reasonably expected, and equating that either to their relationship with you or, more commonly, their relationship with God. If you were a good Christian, then. And so there's a lot of pressure put on people with this kind of religious rationale. It's hugely powerful, especially if you're a person of faith, for whom faith is so important. We see enforced accountability. Now, I know that I am in a room of safeguarders, so I want to put a little caveat on this. We know there are times where there needs to be a safeguarding agreement, where there needs to be accountability in place. And actually, as you'll see later, healthy accountability is a good thing. But we're often talking in these situations where there's no need for that, but somebody is expected to be accountable. One person said to me, my accountability was with a hard hand. I had to ask for every decision I wanted to make in my life. I had to pass it past that person, and they would tell me whether God wanted it or not. Really, really heavy. If you go back in history, we used to talk about heavy shepherding, that kind of going and talking through every decision. Censorship is a huge one. One person said to me, I learned to keep my head down and my mouth shut and look on it as a case of keeping unity. So not speaking out if you have a concern, not asking questions. There might look like decisions are being made by a team, but actually they're maybe being made by one or two people and everybody else's job is to agree. Lots and lots and lots of silencing. That has massive implications when people come out of this experience because, and we did a piece of work last year, excuse me, where we asked people about therapy. And one of the people said, I learned not to speak about my experience, that it was wrong to talk about the harm that had happened to me. Going to therapy is talking about the harm that's happened to you. Equally, going to somebody in a safeguarding role is talking about the harm that's happened to you. So if you've been taught that it's wrong to talk about it, it is incredibly challenging to engage with safeguarding. Thanks, Brett, for the water. Very much appreciated. Lots of pressure to conform to behavioural expectations, sometimes things like financial giving, sometimes sexual behaviour, and often with a rationale. This is what God wants. This is what is required of you. Sometimes public shaming and humiliation. It's a really powerful means of control. I lecture at a university, and it would be really unusual for a student to stand up or put their hand up in a lecture room like this and say, Lisa, I don't agree with what you're saying. The dynamic isn't there, is it? It would be unusual. I'm not asking you all to do it now because it could turn into chaos, but it would be unusual for you until you're invited to ask a question to actually put your hand up and say something. So where people are controlled either in a small group or a whole group setting, where something is said about them. I'm going to use Brett because I know Brett a bit. So if I publicly, I'm not going to, but if I publicly shamed Brett in front of all of you, not only have I addressed Brett and whatever it is that I want to address here, but every single one of you in this room have then watched that happen. And we have something called vicarious learning. You don't need something to happen to you to learn from it. And what people learn in experiences of spiritual abuse is, I don't want that to happen to me, so I'm going to conform and do all those things because I don't want that to happen to me. And I want to be really clear about this, that's a really natural way to respond. Nothing that happens when people experience spiritual abuse is their fault, but they are often made to feel like it is. Other things that we see that I think make spiritual abuse are exercising control through using sacred texts or teaching, using verses out of the Bible. So there's lots of verses that I could quote. Touch not my anointed is one that I hear a lot. So he's in charge or she's in charge, and they've been anointed by God, and therefore you can't question them or disagree with anything that they do. Passages like unity can be really positive, can't they? We all look after each other, we care for each other. My husband in the pandemic used to spend his days phoning people. And I remember one day he came down and his ear was bright red because he'd literally just been on the phone all day to people who otherwise wouldn't have had a call. But actually, if you use unity in the way that that person was taught it, keep your head down and your mouth shut, you mustn't speak out. Because if you do, you threaten unity. It becomes something that is not positive and is harmful. And I was really encouraged about you talking about theology, because I think there's a massive need for us to do more theology around issues of abuse and safeguarding. Safeguarding is not separate to the work of the church. It is the work of the church, but we often separate out the two, and I think there's a massive need for that. Sorry, that's a personal passion of mine. We often see requiring unquestioning obedience to the abuser. So one person said, if you love God, obey me. That's what you need to do. A sense of divine position. So God's put me here, you can't question me. I've been doing a bit of work looking at doing a review of reviews. So there's been quite a few cases recently which have elements of spiritual abuse in them. And one of the most common things in those the themes when you do that review are two things. One is the person wasn't accountable to anybody, even if they looked like they were. And one is leadership on a pedestal. This person, and because somebody's leadership and ministry looks really successful, we don't want to ask any questions about it. And that's a real issue that we've got. Sometimes exercising control through threats of spiritual consequences. God will not love you if you do this. One person that I met had a letter in their handbag that their minister had written to them 12 years before, in which it said, you will never go to heaven now. That is hugely controlling, hugely controlling. So those threats of spiritual consequences, one person said to me, it's not just about what happens to me now, or even in this life, it's what happens to me for eternity. That's hugely controlling. And then sometimes superiority and elitism. So you'll never be in another place like this. We've got the real truth. It makes it very difficult to leave a place or to challenge a place. Just want to show you a picture from the disclosure research. This is a picture that somebody created. And you can see they set this place. So what you can see is a dinner plate. And there's a Bible on the dinner plate. And there's a knife and fork. And I'm just checking the time to make sure I keep the time. And on the plate, the Bible verse is, love keeps no records of wrongs. And the person said this scripture was used to keep them silent about the abuse that was happening to them as a child. Love keeps no record of wrongs. You can't speak out about what's happening to you. And actually, she said later that she was now learning about scripture as a healthy meal. But she felt she was force-fed it as a child. Hugely powerful stuff. So what does this do to people when they go through this kind of experience? Well, it leaves them in all kinds of situations. Lots of distrust, again, it has implications for engaging with safeguarding or external agencies. Personal discredit. If I can discredit Brett, you don't listen to his story, the situation can continue. Anger, people feel angry, not rightly, about what's happened to them, and often angry that nothing is being done. A number of the cases that we see recently have gone on for a very long time, with multiple people experiencing harm from the same person or persons. In the research that we did, a number of people chose images that represented the vulnerability of disclosure. So I've got just two of those here. The one on the left, the person said, I had an experience that I'd overshared. I kind of wished I could take it back. It was a feeling of handing over the keys to my house. That's what it felt like. Huge when people come. And I think sometimes, because of the work you do, this is part of what you do. And I think for me, when we did this research, I had to go for a long walk because it reminded me again how brave it is to come and talk about the experience that you have. In these images, you're the lighthouse letting people know where the rocky shores are, but the waves are just attacking you because they don't want to know where the rocky shores are. They don't believe they're there. People are drowning and they don't care. It's like they just need you to shut up. And the one that you can see with the tennis ball, I think you can see, you might not be able to from there, but there's a fence, there's a wire fence that the tennis ball is stuck into. And the person called that stuck and said, that when they made their disclosure, it was like somebody went this far and no further. I can't deal with it. And they said that ball is going to fall out at some point in time and I'm going to be left holding it again. Lots of people talked about responses that were sweeping them under the carpet, what they'd said. And this, on the side here, you can see the image where the person is actually invisible. And this was what they said. The response I got was shut up. I was trying everything I could to yell about what had happened to me and yell, please meet me with belief and compassion and some kind of justice. The response I got was, we're not listening, we don't care, we want you to shut up and go away. Really, really difficult stuff to listen to. And as I say, a number of these experiences weren't solely about spiritual abuse. But we did also see a number of helpful responses. So the image that you can see there was made up of emails and messages, and a person said, I kind of wrote how words are often quite painful because they were used to control, manipulate and abuse. But pieces of art that I made was like nice kind of comforting words that were sent to me by different people on emails and messages. The remote island that you can see here, the person said, I felt like I was on a remote island, no one else is there, it was safe and it was calm, like the sea is calm. There was no prospect of anybody turning up or leaving or whatever. And then, as you can see, there's a quote there about safeguarding in the Catholic Church has been really good to me. This was one participant that took part and recognised that for them, safeguarding was the thing that really, really helped them. And they were not alone in that quote. And then another positive image, which you can see again, just this positivity of when somebody is responded to well, feeling like they've got a safety net, feeling that unconditional love and support, feeling like the hands are coming together. And one person said, I don't feel like I have to hide anything anymore. I can just be me. And when we did the work on spiritual abuse, we found some things that were really important. Now, the first lot of these is going to be your bread and butter, and you're going to be thinking, why have I come to a keynote to learn what I already know? But I think it's important. People who are coming to talk about spiritual abuse wanted to be safe. They wanted to be taken seriously. They were very aware that spiritual abuse might not be taken seriously, and they wanted it to be. The most prevalent response was active listening. It came out again and again. We've actually written a paper about some of these responses I can send on. People wanted to be validated. They said they felt they'd lost themselves. So it was really important when they came to disclose that they were validated as an individual, as a person. One person said, affirm the person's self-value. Somebody else said, recognise that in coming to talk to you about spiritual abuse, the person is probably scared out of their wits. And then not minimising or blaming. That is really common. In one response, somebody said that they were told it's not physical, it's not sexual, it's not financial, there's not really anything we can do to help you. And so not minimising what has happened is really important. One person said, don't minimise or deny. Don't blame the person for bringing up something which might cause difficulty for your organisation. I know that you would not do that, but I'm just sharing what people have said. And one thing that's really important to understand is this may not be your response, but this may be a response they've already had. They might already have tried to tell somebody about what happened to them, and this might be what they've been met with. And so that's important to know that. It can be helpful to give voice to that for people. Other things that came up were being really careful about the use of Bible and prayer. One person said, for somebody who is devout, everything becomes scary. Everything becomes dangerous. Prayer is scary and the Bible is full of landmines. Matthew 18 came up quite a bit. So this is a passage that says, if you've got a problem with your brother, take it to your brother. That's quite good, isn't it? You know, if I'm falling out with somebody in my church about coffee, we seem to be able to fall about a lot of things, don't we? Coffee, the colour of the carpet becomes so important. But if I'm falling out about that, I can sort it out. If me and Brett have a disagreement over, what my slide should look like, we can talk about that. That's fine. That's not what we're talking about here. But often, when people experience spiritual abuse, they might be asked to go to some kind of mediation or restorative justice. That might be the first thing that they've been asked to do. And that's based on this Matthew 18. And it's really important to recognise that that's not safe. One person said, I felt that I was obliged to go and speak to the person who was spiritually abusing me before I could seek help. In any other case of abuse, it wouldn't be appropriate, and it isn't here either. Someone else said, don't organise a meeting as if this is a meeting of two equal parties, because it is anything but that. Again, not suggesting you would, but it might have happened. And that might have added a layer to what people have experienced. People wanted to know about the bounds of confidentiality because their trust has been broken. Who are you going to talk to? Where's it going to go? How long is it going to take? Was a really important one. what support is available to them, and then where things are going to be referred on to. Those were all really important points for people. So, I've got about 5 minutes left. I might squeeze it to 7. But I want to talk a little bit about healthy cultures because this is just so important. People's experience of abuse and safeguarding happens within a culture. We've talked already about the negative representation of safeguarding. Sometimes in the reviews that I've done, it is really clear that safeguarding is talked about very negatively. If it is talked about negatively, why would somebody who has an experience of harm want to come and engage with that? We've got to do something about that. Lack of a safeguarding culture, some people not complying. These are things that some of you are nodding, you're like, yes, Lisa, we understand this. Sometimes challenges working with statutory agencies and just the workload. It's hard work, what a lot of you do. It's all consuming. We also found, and this was another thing that kind of made us stop and think, 1 in 5 people said they had felt overwhelmed in their safeguarding role that they had at some point or another. And one person said, who was safeguarding the safeguarding leads? As they come back to, so remember we did this in COVID, as they come back to what may well be an ever-increasing workload. I think that's part of what today's conference is about trying to take care of you as you take care of others. So it's really important that we have safeguarding policy, procedure and training. Those things really matter even though people don't always, when I remember doing safeguarding training at our church and I said, who's read our safeguarding policy? And because it's me, they all went, I went, that's great because we're just about to have a quiz on it. And everyone's like, and I said, we're not really going to have a quiz on it. But it's really important stuff, isn't it? And I know from the other side just how important it is. When there was no policy in the Church of England around spiritual abuse, it was very difficult for anybody who had this experience to get it responded to well, because the policy wasn't there to allow it. So it all matters. But underneath all of that, there are attitudes, beliefs and behaviours. You can have all the policy training in the world, but if we don't have a positive attitude to safeguarding, an attitude that says we care about victims and survivors, and I know I'm preaching to the converted here, but those policies and practice and training, we've got to start looking at the culture. We've got to start asking people to think about, they are part of the culture. Everybody that comes into Christian organisations or churches, they are part of the culture. What does that culture look like? 31A have done some really good work on this. They've got a culture cube which you can get hold of. You can actually, if you want to, how many of you like to play a game? We're a bit of a family of gamers. Anybody like a little game, a little board game? We don't do video games. We like, a good board game. Well, you could take this to your leadership teams. You could shake the cube, and then there's questions to ask. How well do you communicate? How well do you manage power? What's your structures like? It's really good ways for us to start to, in a non-threatening way, get people to think about the culture they're part of. In the domestic abuse research we did, one of the things we found was that preaching and teaching about abuse was really important. And I won't give too many details, but I was in a training meeting where a member of clergy said to me, it doesn't matter what we preach about. It doesn't make any difference. There's lots of reasons why we might want to reflect on that. But actually, one of the people that completed the survey was a minister, and they said they wanted to speak about domestic abuse in their church, and they were told they didn't need to because we know everybody here. And they did, and they said at the end of the service, 9 women came forward to tell their story. We've got to do something about how we communicate. There was also someone who said they went to speak to their minister, and they said they got an amazing response. They wanted to be able to be their whole self in that context. They wanted to tell what had happened to them in the past. And they said the response was incredible. It included loads of practical support, lots of signposting. It was, textbook response. But at the end of the quote, they said, never in the 2 years that I'd been in that church was there a signpost that this was a safe place to tell my story. I took a huge risk. There's something about communicating. So that tool can really help us. We want to create cultures where safeguarding is foundational, not an add-on. Safeguarding, I often have a slide at the beginning of safeguarding training, and it's a dog with a mask on, and I start off and it's called Safeguarding Ministry in Disguise. And because we have created a false sort of separation, and it's not helpful. So healthy culture respects, values and nurtures everyone. If we get these healthy cultures right, when we start to see people experiencing spiritual abuse, it will stand out. It is always all right to be able to ask a question. It is always all right to disagree. How you do that matters, but it's okay. Guiding and empowering through biblical teaching, but not controlling people through teaching. Making sure that we've got cultures where leaders are nurtured and nurturing. Also valuing whole life service, not just what happens in our communities, in our church that matters, but what's going on outside. Healthy accountability is really important. I talked earlier about the risk of no accountability, enforced accountability, but often when I get asked to review cases, there just isn't accountability there. Inclusion and guiding behaviour, but respecting choice. People have autonomy and choice, and we need to respect that. I think we need to do a lot of work around power. What does power, how do we influence each other? If you do a free image search on Pixabay, these are the images that come up. I'd like to say there are a lot of images of white men lifting weights. I'm not sure what that says about we think about power. But we need to reflect about how power is used within our cultures and our communities. That's conversations that we can start to have. Whose voices don't we listen to? Who don't we hear? How do we start to reflect about the way in which we influence? And this is a question that I always ask. I'm nearly there, you'll be very pleased. I always ask, would I want to be led by me? That's a question that I always ask when I do training. I have 2 children born on the same day, 3 years apart. That's how organised I am and how sure you can be that you will get to a break on time. But my daughters are wonderful and different. And I asked them both this question, and my youngest daughter was like, oh, I don't know if I'd want to be really reflective. My eldest daughter said, I would love to be led by me. But it's a really good question, because one of the things when you look at cases of spiritual abuse or unhealthy culture is a lack of the ability to reflect. So you might be in the unhelpful bit of the fruit polo, and somebody might come and say, actually, Lisa, what you said about that was really unhelpful for me. That might happen to me after this talk, and I'm going to have to live out what I'm just about to say. But actually, in the moment, I might not respond particularly well. I hope I would. But I should be able to self-reflect. And I think one of the things that has gone wrong is that we have not encouraged people and communities to reflect enough on what are we doing? What is our culture? What are the non-negotiables of our culture? How do we deal with disagreement? How do we deal with preaching and teaching? How do we talk about safeguarding in our churches? How do I talk about it in my individual conversations? Self-reflection is a really important part of healthy communities. And so to finish, in the disclosure research that we did, one of the participants talked about when they had disclosed and had a really negative response to that disclosure. And later in the interview I said, did that ever change? And they said, oh yeah, sure, Lisa. Because when we know better, we do better, right? And I think the message that I'd want to leave you with is you might now know a little bit more about spiritual abuse. And I want to encourage you that as you know better, we can do better. Thank you. Finally say, I started the work on spiritual abuse because I had an experience of spiritual abuse. And people would often say, don't tell anyone that, they won't take you seriously. You can be a victim survivor of abuse and be a jolly intelligent person who's got lots to contribute to the world. And so I'm not ashamed of that experience, but I do know the depth of it. So you are here in different roles today, but if this talk has taken you to a place where actually the role you're now in is somebody who's experienced this, then I want you to make sure you look after yourself. I'm not going to say, I'm going to whisper, you don't have to go to the workshop. But you may need to take some time out. You might need to chat to somebody about what has happened, because we come in different roles, don't we? So just take care of yourself, and thank you very much for having me.